What is the most creepy memory you have from when you were a kid?
In my old hometown, we weren't allowed to play out of the yard. The highway was at one end and the bayou at the other.
Like alligators walking down the road was a normal occurrence, you know.
So, there was a girl who would ride her bike up and down the road, and we'd chit-chat. She was maybe 7, 8. I know I was like 5 or 6. We weren't too far apart. Anyway, she would come and talk, and then we would part.
Sometimes she came with other kids, sometimes not.
One day, she invites me to her birthday party. I have to ask my mom if I can go.
She said she lived a couple of houses down, no big deal.
Mom says no. You don't know her, she doesn't live on this street. I was upset, so unfair, she's my friend. I never saw her again, and thought she was mad at me. I went back to visit family, and brought up this story with my mom and aunt, about how weird it was I never saw her after that. They got really quiet, and my aunt tells me that there was a girl by that name, who was found in this guy's house, along with a bunch of other kids. He did awful things to them, and they couldn't survive. Here's where it's creepy. They would have passed away by the time I was talking to them. I never felt so cold, and we all agreed to never talk about it again. I remember when I was about 12 onward, I'd randomly wake up in the middle of the night to my mother standing in the doorway. She had this look she would give when she was particularly messed up between the alcohol and opioids and sleeping pills she'd mix. It was absolutely satanic. On multiple occasions, I would wake up to her just staring at me, but way longer than just to check on me. She would just stand there for what seemed like forever, and if I even slightly moved, she'd scream at me for being awake and punish me. One day my dad called me out to the living room, and my mother is there, looking pretty concerned, telling him he was taking things too far. He tells me, "Your mom says you've been laying in bed crying at night, because you're afraid some stranger going to come into your room and scare you." What's that about? I was totally confused, and just blew it off as one of my mom's drunk and told him I absolutely didn't. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized whenever my mother said something about someone else, she was projecting. Like she told me for years that she suspected that my dad was cheating on her. She was actually cheating on him. We don't talk anymore, and I've informed her I will use whatever force necessary to remove her from my property, if she ever gets it in her head to show up. This story is not paranormal, but still freaked me out. When I was 4 or 5, my parents would take me to my grandpa's house every weekday, so I wouldn't be home alone. My grandma had work, but she would come to pick me up around the time my sister got out of school, so we could both go home. My sister wasn't feeling well one day, so we both went to my grandparents' house. Everything was normal for a few hours. He made us breakfast and turned on cartoons for us. My sister wanted to watch something else, so she turned around to him and asked him to put on her favorite show. He didn't respond. He had a weird look on his face, like he was spaced out but angry at us at the same time. He clearly wasn't himself. It was only a bit unsettling, so my sister asked him again. He started making groaning sounds like he wasn't fully aware of what was happening. My sister got up and dragged me down the hall. We had to pass by his chair, and when we did, he grabbed my arm. It wasn't like a playful thing. He was holding on tight. It hurt really bad, so I tried to get away. I eventually did, and we continued running down the hall. We got into the bathroom, and my sister said he was playing a game. She said he was a zombie, and we need to find a cure for him while staying hidden. We stayed in the bathroom for 10 minutes, and then we tiptoed back. He was totally normal when we got back, and it seemed like he had no memory of what had just happened. This happened again when I was alone with him. I didn't know how to use a phone
because I was so little, so I just grabbed his flip phone and hid behind his chair. I tried to call someone, but I obviously couldn't. I had to sit behind his chair while listening to him make that scary groaning sound. My grandma eventually came home, and he was just suddenly normal again. My family says he has a sickness. They call it a seizure, but I've tried looking for a seizure that has similar symptoms to the way he acts when he has them, but I've had no luck. Looking back, it probably isn't that scary, but it has stuck with me for a long time. One day I was walking home from school, and the walk was about a mile long on the main road. I had my headphones in at the time, and while I was walking I saw a little white cat, so I took out my headphones to try to say hi to the cat, only for it to run off. I was lucky for that cat because after I took the headphones out, I saw a utility van pull up to the entrance of the subdivision I lived in. A guy in a weirdly old-looking thrift shop suit got out of the side door, and the van sped off around the corner. I noticed him and walked at a distance past him. He started to follow me, and I started to walk faster only for him to match my pace, so I booked it, sprinting full out toward my house. And surprisingly he started running after me too, still not saying a single word. I ran through a couple of bushes to get to my front door faster, and knocked on it loudly for my dad to let me in. I looked back and saw the white van pull up to the guy, load him in, and screech off out of the subdivision. Later on, it turns out there was a trafficking group in the area that preyed on towns outside of Detroit. The guy I saw was eventually arrested. When I was 5, my best friend from kindergarten would invite me to go to the skating rink with her family every Friday night. Since I was so little, I wasn't allowed to stay overnight, but my mom would allow me to go skating since it was close to our house. My friend's mom was super nice, but her dad was really weird. He always mentioned that I should come to stay the night with them, every time. He would tell me to ask my parents every weekend, even when they refused many times. It was creepy, since he seemed to be the main one who wanted me to stay over. He would also buy me lots of toys at the skating rink and ask me to sit on his lap and give him hugs. I never did, because I was not a touchy-feely kid and didn't like being affectionate with people who weren't my parents. He would try to emotionally manipulate me into it by telling me that I wasn't being nice, and I was really hurting his feelings. He would make sure that I could see him sulking about it, looking pathetic. One Friday, my mom went to the skating rink too, for whatever reason. He acted this way out, and open with me, even in front of my mom. It was then that my mom realized, well, this man is a sick freak, and she stopped letting me go places with them. My mom never explained why to my friend's parents. She just stopped allowing me to go. When I wasn't allowed to go skating with them anymore, he went out of his way to have a discussion with my parents. He actually came to my house to talk with them. Even though nobody directly accused him of being a pedophile, he told them that he didn't mean anything by how he was with me. He just thought I was an extra special little girl. He mentioned again how super great it would be if I could come over for sleepovers. Thankfully, I was never actually touched by this man, but he was clearly trying to groom me. My mom always taught me that I never have to touch anyone that I don't want to touch, no matter how bad it hurts their feelings. She said, if a grown-up's feelings are hurt because I don't want to touch them, then that is not my problem to deal with. She had this drilled into my head before this, so I never responded to his manipulation tactics. I remember it making me deeply uncomfortable, though. Like, sick to my stomach. I don't remember exactly how young I was at the time, but it was really young. My parents both worked full-time, and my very old grandmother lived with us and took care of me during the day. I was an only child. We lived in flats. Throughout the day, Grandmother would take long baths, and I'd be seated in front of the TV till she got out and played with me. This one time she took much longer than usual. At some point, after calling out to her and getting no response, I went to the bathroom door and knocked. When she didn't come out, I went in. She was submerged to her chin. Her body was twisted. Her face was so contorted it looked like she was in agony. Her lips were completely skewed to one side of her face, and her eyes were, I don't know, just blank. I don't remember what happened next. But whenever my parents recounted the story, they say, I ran out screaming bloody murder out of the flat. Neighbors heard me, called an ambulance, and my parents. She had a stroke and would be bedridden for the rest of her life. She passed away a year or so later, I think. It's weird. I can't really remember what she looked like anymore, but her face at that time stuck with me. Parents told me I didn't speak 4 weeks afterward. I had something similar when I was in college. I rented a terraced townhouse with my cousin for the summer, so we could be close to our jobs. He was sound and totally normal. Well, with only 2 of us living there, we noticed weird little things, like bedroom doors being open that weren't in use, candles and ornaments being moved around, oven doors left open repeatedly, money going missing. All small, and we both assumed it was the other person, until happy birthday balloons appeared scattered in the sitting room. One day right around my cousin's birthday. She thanked me for them. But it wasn't me. I was alone one night and heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I crept along to the bedroom door, which was already locked, and saw shadows on the other side. I froze, and they went away eventually. After this, we asked the guy in the basement about the events, who confirmed that the students always had strange things happening. But with 7 to 8 of them in the house, normally they all blamed each other. Turns out, the attics of the entire terrace were linked, and there was likely someone living up there. They had keys to the bedrooms and the front door of this house because the locks hadn't been changed in years and years. I'll never live in an old house again. I've lived in a small mountain town in Colorado for 17 years. When my friends and I got our licenses, we'd drive around in the mountains when we got bored. This one area we went to frequently is beautiful, but it's known to be pretty messed up. We were driving around one night when we suddenly passed a man walking on the road. It was weird because we hadn't seen him in the headlights initially. It was more like he appeared out of nowhere as we were passing him. I thought he was walking a little weirdly as I looked back at him, so I asked my friend to stop. Maybe he was hurt or something. He paused for like 10 seconds when we stopped, and then he started running at the vehicle. Not an, oh let me catch up to them real quick jog, with a wave, or anything like that. A full-blown sprint like he had a personal vendetta against us. It freaked us out and my friend hit the gas again. We did call the police just to make sure we didn't leave him in danger, but didn't hear anything else about it. I had to start sleeping with a light on, because I was having nightmares. I couldn't even bring myself to move around in my bed, to adjust and get comfortable. I knew it was ridiculous, but just couldn't shake that fear for weeks. When I was a little girl, probably around 8 to 9 years old, I used to rollerblade around our house. I always told my parents to count, and when I finished they'd tell me how fast I was. Our house was kind of a long apartment building. I'd guess it's around 100 meters long, so skating around it meant I had to skate for a couple of 100 meters. I've always found the backside of the house kind of creepy when it's dark. The road is in between the apartments and a church, and the lights from the apartments don't reach the road, so there's only a few street lights to light the way. This particular day was in the fall sometime. I know this cause it was in the afternoon, but it was already dark when I was about to skate around the house. I remember turning around and coming to the back side. The street was empty except for someone on a bicycle further up the street. I knew it was a bike cause at first, all I saw was the light on his bike, which meant he was going in the opposite direction, towards me. Shortly before passing each other I see it's a guy, and he's intensely staring at me, I mean really staring. He's even turning his head towards me as he passes. A couple of seconds after we passed each other I turn my head to look behind me, and he's still staring, his head now turned in the opposite direction of where he was going. It scares me so I try to go faster, and a few seconds later I look back one more time. This time, I see him making a U-turn before coming my way. He's going pretty fast too, cause he's going off the road onto the grass before turning back onto the road but in the opposite direction. Like I said, it's pretty dark, and I'll never forget that headlight of his, and how I see it turn back towards me. Anyway, I freak out and skate as fast as I can around the building, never turning around again cause I'm too scared to look. I also keep thinking that I don't want him to know where I live. So instead of just going straight home, I went onto some smaller path between buildings, and I sat there for a while, before I had the guts to go back home. When I got back my parents were outside, and they wondered why I took so long. I told them what happened, but I don't remember what they said about it. Maybe it was nothing, but there was something weird with how he was staring at me. I definitely won't forget how scared I was, seeing that headlight turn back towards me. To stories from the same place we used to holiday every year, a tiny island, half a mile wide and a mile across, no cars allowed, and it used to be inhabited by monks, so there were many tales of hauntings. The first was when we used to stay at the campsite. I had been to the toilets, and I was walking back to our tent. I passed through a small group of people sitting in chairs, in the middle of the field. Nothing unusual here. People would sit out and stargaze and drink without bothering people inside their tents. As I passed through, someone said something to get my attention. I can't remember what was said, but I was just chatting with them, when suddenly this one man pointed his finger at me. He had a cigarette in his hand, and all of a sudden, all I could focus on was the lit end of this cigarette. He kept on talking to me, but I don't know what he said. All I know is, I could not take my eyes away from that glowing orange dot. I felt very afraid, but I could not move. It was like the whole world had vanished, and it was just me, him, and that damn cigarette that I could not stop looking at. I don't know what happened, but I'm damn sure that dude hypnotized me instantly. I remember hearing a laugh from someone in the group, and it was like the spell was broken. I ran back to my tent with my heart pounding as they all laughed at me. Overall, it is the weirdest thing that has happened to me. I don't really believe in psychics and hypnotism, but that guy sure did something to my brain. The other incident was when we stayed in a cottage overlooking a courtyard, which had a church in the corner. It was the last thing I would see from outside. When I closed the curtains at night, and it used to freak me out. It got to the stage one would crawl under the window to close the curtains without having to look outside at that creepy old church. A few years later, some archaeologists visited the island and did some digging. What did they find under the church steps? The skeleton of a monk buried upside down. My brother and I were kids, probably be around 10 and 11. We went to stay at my aunt's house for a few nights during the summer to visit our cousins. My aunt had a converted garage that she used for an at-home daycare. The door that went from the garage to the house was one of those daycare doors that opens halfway to where the top half is open and the bottom is closed. On the other side of the door was their kitchen. The first night there, my brother, my cousin, and I made pallets in the garage for sleeping. I remember it being dark in the room, but the top half of the door was open, and you could see the glow of the microwave light from the kitchen. I was rolled over facing the other way, trying to get some shut-eye, but my brother and cousin kept horsing around. They were giggling and saying, "Hey, hello, Mom, Aunt, Stop freaking us out. Finally I turned around to see what was up, and I could see the outline of a person standing in the doorway. It looked like their elbow was resting on the top of the half door with their chin resting in their hand. Like they were just there looking at us. The figure stood out, because the glow of the microwave light illuminated them from behind. The boys kept calling out saying, "This isn't funny." Eventually Shadow just got up, turned around, and walked away. We all looked at each other. We got out of bed and went through the door of the kitchen to the living room, where my aunt usually slept. She had sleep apnea and slept in a recliner in the living room. We got there and woke her up and said, "Were you just watching us?" And she said no, she had been sleeping. We four were the only ones in the house. She asked us if the shadow looked like it could have been a man, and when we said yes, she said that sometimes when she wakes in the middle of the night, she would see a man in the hallway from her chair, and that it must have been him watching us.